On today's show, could Jaylen Brown be the star the Houston Rockets are looking for? Why the Celtics might move on from him? What a deal could ultimately look like and how he would fit in Houston? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, taking a look at Jaylen Brown as the potential star upgrade the Houston Rockets are searching for this offseason. A very intriguing avenue that the Rockets could go with Jaylen Brown. We're going to get into why the Celtics might be looking to move on from him, what a deal could potentially look like, a very unique deal presented by Kevin O'Connor. We'll get to him in just a moment, and how he would ultimately fit in a Rockets jersey here in Houston. So let's kind of set the stage really quickly. Why would the Celtics first and foremost be looking to move on from Jaylen Brown? First off, the Celtics are in payroll hell. They are a second apron team, and they woefully disappointed this year, right? Getting bounced in the second round, well below expectations of like a potential, defending their title from last season, and, didn't even make it to the finals or the conference finals. So a disappointing end of their season. Obviously, a large part of that has to do with Jason Tatum's injury, and that plays into kind of this precarious situation that they find themselves in moving forward. And there is a lot of speculation and some rumors swirling about out there that the Celtics could look at next year as kind of like a gap year, right? Like punting on next season and maybe hitting a little bit of a reset button, trying to duck the second apron, trying to, move off of some of their, bad contracts, guys like Drew Holiday, like Kristaps Porzingis, and, recouping some value and maybe getting a little bit younger, different things like that, right? But the reality of the situation is, right, Holiday and Porzingis do not have a ton of value. In fact, I'd argue both those guys are probably looked at as kind of like negative assets at this stage. And so for the Celtics, their best chance to potentially hit a reset button, improve the roster, reduce their payroll tax, like all of this stuff, might come in the way of a Jaylen Brown trade. And we're going to get to the trade proposal here in just a moment, but at least that's kind of on the surface why the Celtics would be looking to move on from, their co-star, right? Jason Tatum's, number 2, and, what it would look like for them moving forward. Because like the most optimistic timeline for return for Jason Tatum is like just before the All-Star break, I think, next season. And so, if you're a Celtics fan, you're kind of looking at next season like a potential lost cause from the jump. I don't know. They've got a lot of talent. They could win games without Tatum, but it's not going to look pretty if that's the case. Now, from the Rockets' perspective, Rockets very clearly, look, they're all the posturing, all the commentary so far has been, continuity is going to be a big factor, and they want to bring everybody back, and they just want to get, have another year of everybody getting better. And I believe in that to an extent, right? Like I'm fully convinced, yes, all the young guys are going to get a little bit better next year. How much better they all get is the difference between plateauing and maybe only winning 50 games next year. Maybe you don't even crack 50 in a Western Conference that is going to be even harder than it was this season, right? That could be the difference between that versus if you are able to make a savvy, smart trade for an immediate star level upgrade, a guy who is a proven commodity, who's been there, who's won at the highest of levels, a guy like Jaylen Brown. That's why it makes sense for the Rockets. Jaylen Brown, even though he had a down year statistically this season, arguably his worst efficiency season as a pro, only shot just over 32% from three, although he's a career 36% 3-point shooter. Fewest points per game in 4 seasons, something like that. Didn't make an all-star team, or I apologize, he did make an all-star team this past year. Couldn't see that. But for the Rockets, you'd be getting a guy who is a proven commodity and a guy who can absolutely, even in a playoff environment, be a go-to option. Be a guy that can be a go-to scoring option late in games, a guy who can take over games on his own in the half court when things slow down, when the buckets become tough to come by. And that's exactly what the Rockets were so desperately missing this past go-around, their first go-around in the playoffs. And obviously, this is a lot, depending on the cost, and I'll get to the very unique trade proposal here in just a second. But just in a vacuum, right? Jaylen Brown answers some of the questions that the Rockets have. He gives them a go-to scorer. He is a proven commodity. He won conference finals MVP. He won the finals MVP the year that the Celtics won the title. He's in his prime right now, so there's no question marks about, oh my God, how much better can he get? What is he? Like, the only question mark would be, what does Jaylen Brown look like not having to share the ball with, a number one option like Jason Tatum? What would he look like if he just stepped in and was immediately the Rockets' number one option? He's not a guy that you want to give the rock to and let him like orchestrate and run the offense, but he's absolutely, an elite player, an all-star caliber talent, and would fit in seamlessly with what the Rockets are doing here. He has a great existing relationship with Ime Udoka. Those two guys have a very strong bond. JB was incredibly outspoken in support of Ime Udoka in the aftermath of what happened in Boston. And I could go back and pull the receipts from our reactions to Ime being hired in Houston and kind of what that would look like. Could we potentially see? There's an episode with like the thumbnail and it shows Ime Udoka and Jaylen Brown. And it's like, could we see Jaylen Brown in Houston in a couple years or down the line reuniting with Ime Udoka? And it would make a lot of sense from that perspective. So the Rockets, I think there's a lot to like there, and the Rockets would absolutely be interested in picking up Jaylen Brown, adding him to this team, depending on the cost, obviously. And then this is the other potential, major downside, and this is the damper on this, right? Is Jaylen Brown is owed a lot of money over the next 4 years, somewhere in the ballpark of more than $200 million. He's owed $53 million next season, then 57, then 61, and then the final year of this contract, where he'll be 32 years old, ballpark, he'll be owed just under $65 million. That is a lot of cheddar cheese. But when you consider the rising NBA salary cap, how that's going to increase each and every year, and the fact that the Rockets are in this position where, again, they could make a very unique trade offer that they won't have the ability to take advantage of down the line without deciding to sacrifice one of Jalen Green or Alperen Sengun, it potentially makes a Jaylen Brown acquisition a little bit more enticing. So coming up, I want to get into the KOC trade proposal for Jaylen Brown, and then we'll kind of kick the tires on that, see how it looks like. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment costs, it can be really easy to lose track. It's happened to me. It happens to me more often than I'd like to admit before Monarch Money. But that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you can actually start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch, first off, I was a little ashamed when I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery and food in general, right? Fast food, like food delivery stuff, all that. Now I budget smarter and I save more. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's get to this pretty unique, I think, trade proposal from Kevin O'Connor involving the Houston Rockets and the Boston Celtics, a Jaylen Brown centered package. Let's go ahead and run that back right now.
If a team misses out on Giannis, could they pivot to Jaylen Brown? And could that team be the Houston Rockets? Could you see Ime Udoka, the head coach of Houston, reunite with Jaylen Brown in Houston with some type of offer like Fred VanVleet, the number 10 pick this year, and some number of future first-round picks. VanVleet has a team option that can be declined if this deal were to happen before July 1st. VanVleet's option could be declined, and the Celtics could cleanly get under the second apron by declining that option. Would give them immense flexibility, tons of future draft capital. And without Jaylen Brown, you'd get to see what Derek White could do, what Peyton Pritchard could do with a ton more touches next season. You'd get to see what guys like Baylor Shireman and Jordan Walsh, these young guys on their rookie skill contracts, what can they offer? Can they give more with more minutes and more touches? There'd be less pressure to move off Drew Holiday or Kristaps Porzingis for low returns. And obviously Jaylen Brown is finals MVP. He has been awesome, for Boston. He won a title, of course. He's been a great player, a great co-star next to Jason Tatum for years, but he's going to be 29 next season. He's going to make $53 million and then $57 million and then $61 million and then $65 million by the time he's in his mid-30s. This might be his peak value for a team that whiffs on Giannis and decides, let's go to somebody else. Let's try for somebody else. So that's where I'm coming from, where I look at the situation from Boston. If you're not going to get a lot for Drew or Porzingis, and if you're not willing to trade Derek White, who has the most value? Who's going to get you the most back and still allow you to get Tatum back the following year?
Okay. So KOC kind of pitches this more so from a Celtics perspective than a Rockets perspective, but that's what we're here for. That's what this show is. It's Locked On Rockets. But in hearing that proposal, I don't see how that's not just a slam dunk win of a deal for the Houston Rockets. If all it takes to get a star level player on the level, on the caliber of player that Jaylen Brown is, and he's a legit star. He's not a superstar. He's not one of your top 5, top 10 players in the NBA, but he is a bona fide star level player. He is a proven commodity. He's, won a title, all that good stuff, right? Great relationship with Udoka. If all it takes to get your hands on him is Fred's expiring deal, the number 10 pick, and then some combo of future picks, and that's where you get into the nitty gritty of like, okay, how many picks is too many picks? Is it all the Rocket? Jaylen Brown's not worth every pick the Rockets have access to in the future. He's not a Giannis level talent. He's not James Harden in his peak. Is he worth, the number 10 pick and then like 2 or 3 more future unprotected firsts and then like a couple swaps in there? I don't know. That's where and I'm not going to get into that, like the minutia of that on this show. The idea though, in theory, Fred, number 10 in this year's draft, and then future assets, TBD, for Jaylen Brown. I think I'm doing that trade in a heartbeat. And I understand the potential financial ramifications from making that trade. And that's probably should be the only aversion to doing that deal. Because if you're the Rockets, look, Fred VanVleet's already 31 years old. And I understand the Rockets, they're the more than likely outcome here is that the Rockets just decline Fred's option and then re-sign him to a longer term deal. But that's the uniqueness that this trade presents, or that Fred's contract situation presents, I should say, because the Rockets have that $44.8 million deal to include in a potential trade package. And that's going to be that's their biggest bargaining chip to make a home run kind of swing. Because if they don't do it with Fred's deal this time around, the next time a star player becomes available, it's going to have to include one of Jalen Green or Alperen Sengun. Or at the very least, it's going to have to include both of Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet if you renegotiate Fred's deal and get him on something like 3 years, $60-ish million. Because then in order to get the salary up to matching a star level player, if that's the route that the Rockets decided to go down the line, at the trade deadline or next summer or whatever, you're going to need salary matching to be able to make that happen. And at that point, the 2 biggest salaries on the team are Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, making $33 million a year. followed by Dillon Brooks, and then whatever Fred VanVleet's new deal would look like. So this is a very unique opportunity for the Houston Rockets to cash in on Fred VanVleet's contract. And I made this very similar pitch, but for Kevin Durant instead of Jaylen Brown. Essentially, you use Fred's contract to absorb, use it as the salary ballast, whatever you want to call it. And then you include the capital or the, one or two young pieces, whatever it may be. Honestly, I think KOC is like super underselling Jaylen Brown. Like essentially just salary relief and then picks for Jaylen Brown, a pick-laden package. I mean, I think the Celtics could at least try and squeeze Tari Eason out of the Rockets, but I'm not going to fork over more than the Rockets need to be able to make this trade happen. So I'm just going to roll with the KOC package. I'm doing that trade in a heartbeat. That gives you a starting lineup next season. No other changes. That gives you a starting lineup next season of Jalen Green, Jaylen Brown, Amen Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Sengun, with Reed Shepherd, Cam Whitmore, Dillon Brooks, Tari Eason, and Steven Adams off the bench. That is an absurd top 10. And we'll get into kind of the fit and some of the other notes there. I want to highlight very quickly here, though, the financial component of this, because that's going to be the biggest one that everybody's worried about. Everybody's going to look at the amount of money that Jaylen Brown is owed and freak the hell out, right? Oh my God, how can we pay Jaylen Brown $60 million a year? So first off, yes, that would be it. It's not that anything would necessarily be prohibitive right away if the Rockets make that deal, but things become tight after the Rockets make that trade, right? They would certainly be, I don't have the numbers right in front of me. They'd certainly be a first apron team. They might even be encroaching upon the territory of being a second apron team if they make that deal. But here's the real concern. And this is going to be everybody's number one concern. And everybody asks every offseason, every trade deadline, how can they keep all the young guys, right? How are they going to keep, Jalen and Sengun and Jabari and Tari and Amin and Cam and Reed if you make that trade? Well, first off, credit to Rafael Stone for being able to retain Sengun and Jalen on relatively team-friendly contracts. Now, the uniqueness with Jalen's deal is the fact that he has the chance to potentially opt out summer 2027. So if Jalen balls out over the next couple of years and becomes this uber consistent, lead guard, awesome, cool, then the Rockets are going to have to revisit that discussion and figure out, are they willing to pay him a max contract in summer 2027? That becomes kind of the one big barrier here. But outside of that, Jaylen Brown's getting paid his max deal. Alperen Sengun's under incredibly team-friendly contract for the next 5 years, so you don't really have to worry about him. And then the one other max contract guy you're looking at on the Rockets roster is Amen Thompson. And he'll be eligible to negotiate his rookie max deal. And let's face facts, Amen Thompson is going to command a rookie scale max contract. He is. No ifs, ands, doubts, whatever about it. It's happening. He'll negotiate that next offseason, but it won't kick in until the 27-28 season. Just like Alperen Sengun just finished the last year of his contract. And then this upcoming year, his new contract kicks in and he's making $30-some-odd million, just like Jalen Green, right? So for Amen Thompson, he wouldn't be making that top dollar amount until that year, 27-28. And that would be the second to last season of Jaylen Brown's current contract, where he'd be making $61 million. So yes, the Rockets would have a pretty steep payroll at that point. But assuming you're able to keep guys like Jabari and Tari, whose contracts are going to have to be negotiated this offseason, right? Any potential extensions for them, if you're able to keep them on relatively team-friendly deals, role player style contracts in the realm of, 12 to 20 million a year, right? 15, if you could get Tari on 4 years, $60-ish million, and Jabari on 4 years, 80 million or 70 million, something like that, essentially about 20 million a year. If you could keep both of them on contracts somewhere in that ballpark range, while having Sengun locked down, while having Amen Thompson on his rookie scale max, Jaylen Brown still under contract, Reed Shepherd will still be on his rookie deal for another year after that. You won't really be up against the wall as far as, oh my God, we need to offload kind of where the Celtics are right now. That won't happen until much further down the line. And in the immediate here and now, it gives you a win now piece that absolutely elevates the Rockets past where they were this past season. I want to talk about the potential fit with Jaylen Brown, what that version of this team would look like next season, essentially with Jaylen Brown in place of Fred VanVleet. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so assuming, Rafael Stone and Brad Stevens are able to iron out this trade and make it happen, the Rockets essentially roll into this next season. They bring back Steven Adams, bring back Jae'Sean Tate, like bring back the usual suspects, right? Basically, the only major change being, Fred VanVleet out, Jaylen Brown in. The biggest change would be losing the guy who's been your lead guard for these first 2 years under Ime Udoka. You lose the steady guiding hand of Fred VanVleet, and that's a big loss, right? Fred has been a huge part of both on and off the court, kind of teaching these young guys how to win, the veteran leadership that he provides. He's very much the vocal leader, the on-the-court leader of this Rockets team. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you consider how big a role he has played in the turnaround of this organization. That being said, Jaylen Brown certainly strikes me as the kind of guy who can be, a vocal locker room presence, can be a leader, has been a guy who's won at the highest level, just like Fred VanVleet has. First off, and Jaylen Brown's like a super smart dude. Dude's like mega into like robotics and stuff. Like it's kind of wild. Just look into Jaylen Brown like off the court stuff. If you so desire. But I think from a locker room chemistry perspective, that'd be a tough pill to swallow and a kind of a major blow. But that being said, looking at it from an on-court standpoint, the biggest dilemma is you lose your primary ball handler, right? And that means there would be a lot of pressure on Jalen Green and Amin Thompson in your starting lineup as your primary ball handlers. There would also be some added expectations of ball handling responsibility on Jaylen Brown, probably more so than what he was used to in Boston, although he's not a scrub when it comes to handling the basketball. But I don't think Jaylen Brown's necessarily the guy that you want like initiating offense and telling guys where to be and orchestrating and conducting and all that stuff. Let him be, let him thrive as a play finisher, more so. But that starting lineup gets a lot bigger. They get stronger. Jalen Green is still a little bit of kind of, I'm not going to say he's the weak link because he's grown tremendously on the defensive side of the ball. Teams will still try to pick on him occasionally, but you become an even more dominant switching team 1 through 4 with Jaylen Brown out there instead of Fred VanVleet, right? The Rockets defense, which has already been phenomenal, gets even better by adding Jaylen Brown to the mix. And if you do that trade, right, then again, very, very high expectations for Jalen Green and Amin Thompson as the primary ball handlers, the primary initiators for the Rockets offense, and some heavy responsibility would be falling on Reed Sheppard. I think the ability to pull the trigger on that trade depends on how high you are, on Reed Sheppard's future, right? If the Rockets still really believe that he's, who they think he is and that he has the chance to be the Rockets starting point guard down the line, then I think you do that trade, no hesitation, right? And next year there might be some growing pains, there might be some bumps in the road with some combination of your primary ball handlers being Jalen, Amin, and Reed. And obviously you can still lean on some playmaking from Jaylen Brown. You can lean on Alperen Sengun as your facilitating hub offensively. Like there's a lot to like about that dynamic. And it kind of matches Ime Udoka's first version of the Boston Celtics, the team that he made it to the finals with, because they didn't have a traditional point guard. They didn't have a traditional table setting guard who ran the offense the way that Fred VanVleet does. And I think that just kind of means that everybody's expectations of facilitating and sharing the basketball kind of elevates to where if you lean a little bit more into Alperen Sengun, you've got all these weapons around him with Jaylen Brown and Jalen Green and Amin Thompson and Jabari. Like you just lean more into that identity, and it could be something really special offensively. And yeah, I mean, thinking about, seeing all the times that Jaylen Brown has shown up big in the playoffs, I think he becomes a guy that teams would have to game plan for, and that would make life easier for Jalen Green, because then suddenly if teams are game planning for, or putting their best defender on Jaylen Brown to slow him down, then maybe Jalen Green gets the weaker of the two defenders, or maybe Jalen Green doesn't get an entire defense game plan towards slowing him down. You get both Jalen's as your number one and number two options offensively. You get your connective tissue pieces in Alperen, Sengun, and Amin Thompson, being able to set things up out of the middle of the floor, getting downhill, creating, forcing double teams, that kind of thing. Sengun gets to kind of slot into more of that tertiary scoring role offensively, where he gets to score, off little short rolls to the basket, or, drives from either of the Jalen's or from Amin. And he gets to focus more on his playmaking creation ability out of the center of the floor for all these other weapons that are flanking him on either side. I don't know. I think, to me, it sounds like a very intriguing outcome for the Rockets. And when you start looking around the NBA landscape at some of the potential star players available, while Jaylen Brown doesn't necessarily present the upside of a true superstar level player, I think that he would be able to elevate this Rockets team into legitimate contention status throughout the duration of his prime, right? Throughout the duration of his contract. And it's, again, you kind of get to do both things, right? You get to cash in for a star player that helps you win right now. And again, it's not like he's an over the hill vet, right? He's 28 right now. So he's in the middle of his prime right now. And then while JB is, your best player or tied for your best player or whatever, for the, next 1, 2, 3 years, whatever it is, you hope that somebody else grows and ascends and elevates their play into that true number one option role, right? Maybe it's Jalen Green down the line. Maybe it's Amin Thompson. Maybe Sengun levels up more. So it's kind of, you're able to bridge the gap a little bit with Jaylen Brown right now. And if it doesn't cost you, a chunk of the young core to make it happen, which again, I think KOC was underselling that trade. But even then, I think I'd go so far as being willing to include a Tari Eason to make that trade happen, include a Cam Whitmore to make that trade happen, right? If the Celtics are, demand at least one young prospect plus Fred's expiring plus the picks, I think you could do a lot worse. And given the state of the Western Conference and how stacked things are, that trade, I think, would cement the Rockets as at least, at the very least, the second best team in the Western Conference for the next 3 to 5 years. And them being able to potentially leapfrog the OKC Thunder would be entirely dependent on if one of their young guys ascends and gets up to kind of MVP level, to kind of rival SGA. But that supporting cast and that team depth from 1 through 10 would arguably be the best in the NBA. And I feel that with so much sincerity. So I'm very curious, your thoughts. How would you feel about the Rockets trading for Jaylen Brown if it was that trade that we proposed here? Would you be all in on that deal? Are you not feeling Jaylen Brown? Do you not think he's the answer for the Rockets? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.